Hello and welcome to the New Voice of Ukraine's series of live question and answer live streams. We have had a few. Our previous one was about promoting Ukraine in the American Congress and lobbying and that sort of thing. There's still a lot of work to be done there. Just because an election passed doesn't mean that politics is over. If you turn to our Patreon, if you subscribe to our Patreon, we are offering a lot of benefits now, including these live streams, but also daily infographics as well as newsletters. And because this is all very new, we are always expanding our offerings. So join us over on Patreon, patreon.com/NVUA. Today we are joined by Oz Katerji. His official description is a British-Lebanese conflict journalist and filmmaker based in Kyiv. But Oz, can you introduce yourself in your own words?
Sure. I guess that pretty much sums it up. I've been a conflict journalist for the majority of my adult life, basically straight out of university. Mostly covered the Middle East up until February 2022 when I came out to Ukraine. And it's been all Ukraine from that point onwards, really. This is my first film, my first feature-length documentary. I've done some smaller length things for like Vice and other places before. So this is the first feature length thing I'd done. So not too much to talk about in the past, really. It's all sort of happening now, I guess.
Yeah, so that introduces our first question here, which is that journalism often very much is beat-based. There are people who specialize in certain topics. And yes, as you said, you often covered the Middle East. So what brought you to Ukraine, and what, I guess the follow-up to that is, what lessons or expertise carried over from being a Middle East reporter did you take over into reporting on Ukraine?
Well, while growing up, the whole, security situation in the world was focused around the global war on terror. That was really the big thing. So, really, I cut my teeth in Lebanon, where my father's from. There, but obviously the kind of geopolitical environment that I was probably thinking my career would be focused on was, and it was focused on that for a long time, the global war on terror, the war in Iraq, ISIS, obviously the Arab Spring was a huge thing as well. But how did I get in towards Ukraine? Well, Syria was the sort of Arab Spring country that I focused on the heaviest, and Russia's involvement in there brought my attention to Russian foreign policy in a way that I'd only ever really sort of studied British foreign policy or American foreign policy. I'd never really focused that much on Russian foreign policy. So up until that point in my life, I'd never really concentrated too much. The Cold War happened when I was, a baby. So none of this stuff was really that relevant in my mind. Even the sort of influence of Russia today and so on didn't really come into my line of vision until sort of 2012, 2013, when I started noticing their sort of propaganda activities further back, 2011, early. But again, you could tell that the way they were marketing their coverage was sort of in favor of these dictators in a way that, or rather focusing so much on the American element of these uprisings that really had no bearing on what was happening there. Anyway, Russia stepped in Syria, and really that just brought my attention towards what Russia was doing, and obviously Crimea, 2014. And, from there, I paid a lot of attention to the situation. So by the time that the troop buildup was happening at the end of 2021, I was very much of the opinion that this wasn't a bluff and that Putin was going to invade Ukraine. So, I packed my stuff and I, said goodbye to people and said I'm going to Ukraine because this is going to happen. And a lot of people were very skeptical that it was going to happen, and they were proved wrong. So, here we are. I wish they were proved right, but they weren't. However, that hasn't been a chastening experience for their desire to broadcast opinions on how best to end the war that they thought would never happen in the first place. So, it is what it is. I don't have any kind of special powers of foresight. I just looked at the troop build up on, like lots of other open source focused journalists, and came to the conclusion that this was imminent. So I came to Ukraine. Look, I was a novice on, the kind of daily Ukrainian politics that I cover now. I knew the kind of geopolitical foreign policy element of it, but, the daily sort of goings on in Kyiv between government departments and factions and political figures and stuff really wasn't in my scope, So obviously there was a learning curve and trying to, get familiar with all of that. But yeah, look, I don't claim to be a Ukraine expert of any kind, but I have been a career war journalist. So, I don't feel like, it was too steep a learning curve. It was just a very different type of warfare. One that I was used to covering was incredibly asymmetric, and this is a very different, peer-to-peer type of warfare that I think a lot of newsrooms weren't even prepared to cover themselves with all their vast amounts of wealth and experience. There's no way to kind of prepare for what happened here. So yeah, it just sort of happened. I never envisaged making Eastern Europe part of the place that I would work, but here I am. I work for a Polish TV channel now, and I live in Ukraine, and I'm a Ukraine correspondent. So it's a pivot away from the Middle East, particularly now Lebanon is going through a major war of its own. And I haven't left to go cover that, or even though my family have been there. So yeah, it's not always easy, these decisions, but I love this country. I love being here. I love having the privilege of reporting the stories that are happening here. So yeah, I have no desire to leave. Like, again, I don't like the sort of parachute model of you just pop in places and go to other places when things happen. Not that maybe I've done that myself at various points in my career, but I really prefer the kind of journalism you get when people do stop and take time to get to know their surroundings, and that comes through in the reporting when you have that sort of grounding in the politics and the cultural situation and the social opinions. It's really important. It's fundamental to journalism to be able to explain all of that, to contextualize things. You're not just sort of repeating this happened and this person said this, and you have to try and explain it to people, and you can't explain it to people if you don't understand it yourself, and you won't understand it yourself if you've only just arrived and you haven't spent time reading up on the things. And humans only have so much bandwidth. You can't read up on every conflict in the world. You can't. I mean, you can, but your knowledge will be threadbare. So it's like, yeah, it's specialization is, it takes time, and I'm not a specialist in Eastern Europe, but I am, trying to become a competent correspondent on local issues that wouldn't have been, anything on my mind, 5-6 years ago. So yeah, look, it is what it is, and I'm very happy to be here. I wish that there wasn't a war going on, but this is the situation that we're in now. So we try and do the best that we can in the position that we're in.
Of course, depth is very important, because how do you know the details you're missing if you don't know those details even are to begin with? So I guess before we get into the rest of the questions, we should really have the context of what your film actually is before we can ask questions about it. So can you give just like a brief rundown of the battle for Kyiv and what it's basically about?
Sure. Well, please feel free to put my trailer in the versions.
Yes, I was about to ask that. Yeah.
Trailer incoming now.
Breaking news after the U.S. warned all day of a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin addressed the Russian people moments ago.
Принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
It started before dawn. Ukraine woke to explosions around the capital.
5 o'clock in the morning, I heard explosions. I didn't know how to react.
As Russian forces are getting closer to the city, people are streaming out of it.
Ми маємо той час. Почнеться ще більш кривавий її етап.
Everyone was saying Kyiv will fall in 2-3 days. We cannot let this happen.
Всі ми тут захищаємо нашу незалежність.
Ukrainian citizens are taking up arms to defend their country.
So I'm here with Sviatoslav, and we're driving together to the front line.
Kyiv is a symbol of Ukrainian statehood.
You made it to Irpin?
Yeah, we are in Irpin city. That's great.
Российское правительство отправляет их сюда для удобрения нашей земли.
Heavy fighting has engulfed this town. Go.
More horrific revelations from Bucha, Ukraine. Hundreds of Ukrainians died there, many apparently executed by Russian troops as they retreated from the town last week.
С кем они воевали здесь? Жителями этого дома? Посмотрите.
Мамочка, я прошу тебя. Будь ласка, з Бердичева, Юра Ніколаєвичка. Він помер. Його треба, щоб ми забрали його.
I just thought, they're going door to door here. What was happening in Bucha was systematic.
Вже за межею людяності.
What's it say?
Russia followed. We have a story here in which everybody's involved. No kind of symbolic gesture is enough. Action is needed.
You can't help but feel that you're witnessing something generation defining.
I made a choice to stay in a place where history of my country, of my nation will be written.
The reason Kyiv's defences weren't breached is because of the resistance put up by the men and women defending Ukraine in Irpin and Bucha and in other places like Brovary and Borodyanka.
We have no other choice. Because if we are not fighting, if we are not losing anyone, if we are not having more heroes going to heaven every day, we would be occupied and captured by Russians. And that's it.
I was on the ground 10 days before the war began. I didn't necessarily plan to make a documentary about the war. I just took my camera with me, kind of with the thought in mind that maybe if I get enough stuff, I could turn it into something. But really, what I was there was to cover the human stories, the stories of what was happening in Kyiv when the war began. And I feel like I captured a quite remarkable story of resistance, of resilience, of courage, of the people that I met along the way that were, just ordinary people that were standing up to unfathomable odds. So it follows Sviatoslav Yurash, who is the youngest parliamentarian in Ukraine's history. He's an MP for Zelensky's party, the Servant of the People Party. And I met him. He was like 3.5 minutes walk away from my Airbnb on the second day of the war. And he was there with some of his friends who he'd assembled into this ragtag sort of volunteer crew, and they'd gone to the police station, and the police station were handing out arms to people that wanted to come and pick up weapons. Again, that's crazy. Going to a police station to get weapons is insane. It's the only a zombie sort of movie kind of scenario where do you imagine something like that happening even in a film. But this is what happened. And, when you see him in the film, he's a very striking looking person. He's very tall. He wears this long black trench coat. He looks a bit like a goth, without the hair, but, and he had this AK-47 strapped over him and this crew sort of running behind him. It was a fascinating character. So immediately went up to like, who are you? Why are you armed? What's going on? Sort of thing. So I got to know him. I got to know his team. I got to travel around with his team as they were, trying to do various things. A lot of it was just trying to get aid to people that were quite close to frontline situations that haven't been able to evacuate. They got themselves in some very sticky situations, and I got myself in some sticky situations that will be in the film. You'll be able to see them. But look, it really is the story of just a few days. It's a story of like 38 days or so, and then a few days at the beginning before that and a few days after that of the occupation of the Kyiv region, and then the sort of horror that you get as that occupation was, the liberation of Kyiv happened, the Russians were driven out, and then you get the aftermath of that. And really, I feel like my film is the first feature-length film to tell Kyiv's story from beginning to end in English. There's been a Ukrainian one that's very good. But, it's an opportunity to tell this story from beginning to end in a way that hasn't necessarily been done before. There's been an incredible film about Mariupol, 20 Days from Mariupol, won an Oscar, won a Pulitzer. I mean, incredible work. My film is not that. It's definitely not that. I didn't get anywhere near that level of access and or that level of danger that those journalists were in. For the most part, we were stuck in the center of town with all of this happening around us, and you kind of feel that through the film. You start off not really knowing, as we didn't know in the early days. The first few days, no one knew what was going to happen, and day to day that you go through that, you experience that with the characters in the film, until you get to the end and you see what happened, obviously. So it's I'm not going to pretend that it's anything other than quite a difficult film to watch for the subject matter. It has some particularly harrowing stuff in it because some very harrowing things happened during that time. And I hope that the Ukrainian people feel that I did justice to their story with my on the ground perspective. At the end of the day, it's told through my eyes, through the eyes of a debut filmmaker, a filmmaker who didn't get as much access as he would have wanted to if asked me before the film started, and had I had all of this experience, I would have done things very differently. I was sort of learning as I go as well. So look, my film is raw. It's not the masterwork of a fully formed filmmaker. It's kind of a raw, on the ground perspective of some really truly awful things that happened over a 2-and-a-bit-month period in Ukraine's history, and a period that I feel should be taught for generations to come, because what happened here was incredible. The odds were so stacked against Ukraine, and it was only the bravery of those people and the sacrifices that they made that resulted in this remarkable thing happening, which was Kyiv not falling to the Russian forces. And I think a lot of people forget that and sort of can dismiss what's happening today because of what happened here. And the only reason they have that luxury of being able to be dismissive of the war in Ukraine is because Kyiv stood. And now it's the places in the east that are suffering, and in the north and the south that are suffering the most. But that kind of warfare has turned a lot of people away. But what was happening in Kyiv was something that even those people who have closed their hearts to the situation here couldn't ignore. And it's sad that that's happened, but hopefully being able to tell that story again, to use that to kind of refocus some attention back on the situation here, which is not going away. It's not going to go away just because people want it to go away. So look, that's a kind of long rambling answer, I guess, but my film is going to be out on Monday, the 25th of November, for 2 weeks. You'll be able to watch it online at byline.tv/DocFest. It's part of the Byline DocFest for 2 weeks, so Monday the 25th till the 8th of December. For Byline subscribers, or if you buy a festival pass. So yeah, we don't know about general release yet. We're hoping to get it on some of the big streaming platforms down the line, but we don't have a distributor yet. So we're still having some conversations about that, and hopefully we'll move to a general release at some point early in 2025. But for now, if you want to see the film, you can see the film. It's online for 2 weeks. So use the opportunity now, because in December it's going to be gone, and you'll have to wait till next year otherwise. But yeah, I hope that people take away from the film. Really, it might be told through my eyes, but it's not my story. It's a story of the Ukrainian people, and I'm just privileged to have been able to go some small way to telling that.
Yeah, I think that is one unfortunate part of the coverage of the war right now, is that when it's happening in a bunch of, small villages where, maybe like 3,000 people live, that's a very different story from a European capital of 3 million people. It's no less horrific, but one thing gets more eyes than the other. So you kind of touched on this in your answer there. But at what point during the production process did you go from thinking, I'm doing this to do like reportage, to I'm going to make a documentary? So when did the kind of planning for that begin?
So I've wanted to make a film for some time, but I have just, in the work that I've been doing, the jobs that I've had, I haven't really had any time for camera work. It's all been production and desk-based and investigative producer, and like stuff that I really enjoyed doing, and stuff that I was proud to do. But I kind of wanted to do something a bit more hands-on. But again, that hasn't been my bread and butter necessarily through my career. I've done it in bits and pieces, but the majority of my career has been production or writing or stuff like that. So when I was here in the early days, I was mainly writing. I was going around, I was doing social media stuff. And then I was, at the end of my days, I was writing up pieces of reportage and publishing them. But while I was doing that, I was also taking my camera around with me. So, it's funny, lots of those reportage pieces become the kind of basis for the narrative that will string through the film in the end. But again, I wasn't deliberately trying to do that. It was just the story, my experience, how I lived it, and trying to recount that. One thing that was difficult is, because I hadn't planned in advance to make a documentary. You plan in advance to make a documentary, you pick out your characters, and you spend all of your time with your characters. I didn't have any characters when the war began. I found some characters as the war had started, and then I tried to spend as much time with them as I could, but I was only given really limited time with them. They were busy off doing, again, totally understandably, we were in a completely new environment that no one knew, so some days I had to go off on my own, and it was really difficult to string all of these days that didn't really have any connection to each other, characters that didn't have connection to each other, into a narrative. Again, and this is one of the things that when I started, I had no intention of being a character in my own film. But because I didn't manage to spend every day with the characters as I want, if I'd spent 38 days with the characters, it would be a very different film. Because I didn't, I had to then be a narrator, sort of almost, to say this is what happened on this day, and then we went here, and this is what was happening, and to contextualize, what's happening in the footage. So, yeah, I guess that's it. Really, it didn't necessarily become a documentary until long afterwards, and then I was trying to, at some point after all of that footage and putting it on, in a hard drive, I thought, I've got, I don't know, 100 hours or whatever of footage on this hard drive. Maybe there's something to turn into it. There had to be a conclusive ending to the story. Kyiv had to be liberated for the documentary to exist. You know what I mean? Like, otherwise for me to have the liberty and luxury to say, okay, I'm finished here, I can go home for a bit now. So yeah, but I think that the film probably came out about a year too late. But it took a long time to get interested parties to try and get some money together to try and put it together. They're very expensive things, films. Maybe not necessarily in raw finance terms. You can get by without it, but the amount of manpower that is required to get it in financial terms is it's substantial. So you have a lot of people, working hours that they're not getting paid for effectively because they're working, for a passion. I mean, for the most part, it was mostly me putting all those hours in, but there were others in particular. The music guy, the composer, Jeff, he did 6 weeks worth of work for free. So I'm so grateful to Jeff for like 6 weeks worth of composing. I think I initially told him it would be like, I don't know, 11 minutes worth of audio or whatever, and it was like 48 minutes or something worth of audio that he had to compose from scratch, and he did an incredible job. So again, if you were to put a cost on that, that would be a lot of money to pay for his time. And I'm very grateful to have friends that were just like, yeah, I believe in you, I believe in the project, I would be happy to do this for you, kind of thing. So the only reason the film exists at all is because a lot of people gave it a chance, and we're still not at that level where we have a distributor yet. So we still need, we have no institutional support. A lot of the films that you see have like Channel 4 or BBC or Sky or CNN, MSNBC behind them, Vice, and it's really helpful because the amount of money it takes to do things like take them to film festivals is, again, substantial. It costs a lot of money to apply to film festivals. So it's been a learning process. It's been a labor of love. But yeah, I hope the film is worth it. And I really, honestly, I could talk about it forever, but it's what people think of it that matters. And hopefully it has some kind of impact, and hopefully people respond to it. And I'm yet to see. I've seen reactions in the small amount of theaters that I've played.
Yeah,
in
those
so
going to be
far.
one of the other questions. Was I saw some of the audience response to it was good. So,
yeah,
I guess that's the place for it. Is how was the audience response to the premiere on Friday? I believe it was.
I mean, look, I think the kind of response you're going to get from people that will go to a first-time director's film premiere, they probably have some connection to that there's some reason why they've come to see the film. and their reaction is going to be probably more sympathetic to the film, to the characters, to the filmmaker than the general public are. So it's really what I wasn't expecting those to be a bad review. If that would have been a nightmare, but no, obviously, it's an easy thing to say that everyone I've shown it to at the cinema has really liked it, or has been moved by it or whatever, because a lot of those people follow me on social media or whatever, have come to see it because I've come to their city and I've said, I'm here, come see it, sort of thing. So, I wasn't as nervous about those reactions as I am about the reactions of, people that have no connection to me, who don't know who I am, who've never heard of me, and are going to be just seeing this film for the first time with no prejudged notions of who I am or what story I'm trying to tell. That's really the proof that I'm yet to see yet. So yeah, it's weird talking about it before I've really had those kinds of reactions from people. I suppose lots of, when filmmakers do press, they're used to this by now. But again, I'm learning. All of this is new to me, so I have no idea how people are going to react to it, and I just hope they find something about it that I hope they find it like a powerful story of what those people went through, because it moved me seeing these things with my own eyes, and I just hope that I was able to capture that in the footage.
So regarding the actual process of just journalism, I suppose, documentary or otherwise, is that there was one part in the trailer that really stood out to me, which was one of your subjects, when talking about Irpin, mentioned that the quote was, "We're not supposed to be here," or something like that. And thinking of how permissions work now, and how you mentioned the restrictive permission processes sometimes. So compared to the beginning of the war to now, or beginning of the full-scale invasion, 2014, don't need to get into that debate, but compared to the beginning of the full-scale invasion to now, how open is the process of getting permission to go to the front, to film, that kind of thing?
So that's a relatively complicated question for me for particular reasons. The first being that I found it quite difficult in the first days of the war. I was a freelancer, so I didn't have a company behind me. Now I do have a company behind me, maybe not the biggest player in the broadcast space, but I do have institutional support that I didn't back then. And access was difficult to come by because not just, people were dying, but also no one really knew what to do. Everyone was learning at the same time, right? No one had experienced this kind of invasion in Europe for, this generation anyway. So it was difficult then. Then I was here for the opening phases of the war. Then I went back home for a year, and then I moved to Ukraine permanently. Now, since I've been in Ukraine permanently, I was editing the film for 6 months or so. That was mostly done in Kyiv. And I started to work for this channel, and most of the work is reporting the politics side of things. So a lot of it's just done sitting here in Kyiv and reporting here in Kyiv. So it's not like I've done loads of that. Now, to answer your question, when I have gone to report from frontline positions or whatever, I've done that with so much advanced warning that it hasn't been too difficult, because I've had plenty of time running up to it to prepare for it. So look, and the thing is, there are some obviously there are some frustrations of my own, because I very much am that kind of journalist. So I'm learning new types of journalism now by reporting in Kyiv. It's maybe not where I want to be all the time. I would quite like to be closer to the action a lot of the time. So maybe I'm not the right person to ask about that, because I haven't had too many experiences of trying to get access and being denied access that I've been trying to get for ages. That was more my experience in the early days of the war, because I was right up by the front lines, and that I was trying every day. And that was some of the things that are difficult to tell in the film, because there were most days for me would start at like 6:45, 7 a.m. I'd spend all day in the car heading somewhere, and then we'd wait, to find out whether we could get there. And we'd often be waiting for hours at checkpoints, maybe getting somewhere and then not getting anything when we get to the place, or getting in there and only getting 5 minutes worth of footage or whatever. And it's really difficult to stitch those, the film is told day by day. So there has to be a reason to tell the day's footage. And, when you've wasted a waste of a day, I don't mean that in like,
in a production sense.
Yeah, I mean that in a production sense, that when you've got up in the morning, you and 3 other journalists and a fixer driver, you've all gone somewhere. You've paid for the fixer driver, you've paid for the car, paid for the fuel. That's 4 other journalists who are working, who've had a whole day of trying to get somewhere, not getting somewhere, having to go back, and still paying, obviously, the fixer's day rate. The fixer earns the money, but the journalists don't. That's the way it should be, 100%. But in those situations where you don't get something at the end of that day, it's tough. And you have no choice but to get up in the morning and to do that all over again. And that was the experience very much of the early days of the war, in that it wasn't certain that we would get anything, and we didn't know what was going to happen day to day anyway. So it was a very chaotic environment to work in. I think that probably comes across in the film. I think it probably comes across as a bit manic at times, because that really was just going from place to place with crazy things happening all around. So, yeah, to answer your question shortly, no, my experience has been lopsided in that I found it hard to get to frontline positions when in the early days, when it was a bit more like, well, hey, anyone can go anywhere kind of thing. And there was an element of that, don't get me wrong. Whereas today it's a lot more tightly controlled, and they don't want journalists going into dangerous positions because it puts soldiers' lives in risk, which is completely understandable. Obviously, you can still go under certain conditions with enough time and preparation. And my career is now more focused towards that, rather than the daily freelance work of trying to get stories, or if I spend a day trying to get a story and I don't get a story, that hurts me as a freelance journalist. Now, working for a TV company, I can think more long term. A day lost isn't necessarily a day wasted if I've managed to move myself incrementally closer to the story that I'm trying to tell. So yeah, it's different now. I can understand that for some people, particularly freelance journalists who don't have a company behind them, that it can be tough, that it can be really difficult out here. There's less media interest, and it's harder and harder to get to the kind of access to tell the stories that you want to tell that can earn you money. So again, not that earning money as a journalist is something that I think regular people should be worried about, particularly when there's a war going on here. But I'm just trying to explain it from a journalist perspective of how we have to live our lives. So I do understand that there's probably some frustration from people here who aren't able to get that access, but it's not been a huge issue for me, because again, I've spent a lot of time in Kyiv, and when I do finally get the opportunity to go to those places, I've had enough prep time to make sure that I'm not going to be waiting at a checkpoint for hours.
Yeah, and I especially asked in the context of the battle for Kyiv, because there were several journalists who were killed early on because they went beyond essentially Ukrainian-controlled areas. There were several people that this happened to, including some colleagues that I knew tangentially. So that's the kind of open-ish access it became an issue, which is why it is the way that it is now. And yeah, for any listeners, any coverage of the war often involves waiting at a checkpoint for hours at a time, only to be told you can't go here today because of an artillery threat or something. So it's kind of a grinding process of making things. So I guess we can close things out by asking, like, what are you doing now? Are you working at any projects now?
So I'm still trying to get the film out there. It's not at general release. I still need a distributor. So still doing a bit of promo for that. But I am not working on a long-term project aside from that. I'm still writing articles. You'll see me in foreign policy. I have a podcast. I'm on This Is Not a Drill with Gavin Essler. It's a foreign policy podcast once a week on Wednesdays, comes out. You can find us on Patreon. Daily journalism stuff that I do for TVP World. I'm on TVP World most nights. You can find us at 8 p.m. Central European time, broadcasting every night. Telling the stories that are happening here day to day. I don't have any long form projects at the moment. To be honest, this one was exhausting, 2 years worth of my life. I'm proud of that, but I also probably need a bit of a break before I take on something long form again. And also I want to be much better prepared for doing that. Going off on my own and doing it all on my own was a real learning experience, and I've really benefited from that. But I don't think it's the best way to do this at all. And I've learned that there are better ways to do things. And yeah, that's kind of, if I make another film, it's not for certain that I will, because this was difficult. If I make another film, it will probably be in a while, and it will be if I've been able to get the pieces in place ahead of time to make that process as smooth as possible. Because if the filmmaking process is chaotic, then you're going to end up with a partially chaotic film, and you're going to end up with a partially chaotic release at least. So, trying to make sure that I don't have to go through some of the difficulties I had in the first film would be important. So it's not for certain that I will do anything else. But if you want to find me, you can find me on social media at Oz Katerji, basically everywhere. And please check out my film Battle for Kyiv at the Byline Doc Fest. Let me know what you think. Write me an IMDb review. Write me a tweet. Let me know what you think of the film, because I don't know. I'm waiting to hear what people's thoughts are. So thank you so much for giving me the time on the new Voice of Ukraine. And I appreciate all the support. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for coming on to talk about the film. I know it was a important part of my life, so I'll definitely be watching to see how it was from your perspective. So everyone, thank you very much for listening. So go check out the film, The Battle for Kyiv, and his various other projects. Thank you all very much for listening, and Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava.